The fighting had ended only an hour earlier, but silence never brought comfort in the Pacific. Smoke hung in the air like a heavy curtain, and the broken jungle around the ridge still throbbed with the memory of gunfire. As the U.S. platoon moved through the debris of shattered huts and splintered bamboo, Sergeant David Hale led cautiously, his boots sinking into the damp earth. Every shadow felt alive. Every twisted root looked like the tail of a hidden grenade. The men had learned the hard way that danger did not disappear when the shooting stopped. It often waited quietly behind the ruins of civilian homes. Inside one of those ruined huts, Hale heard it, the faint, trembling sound of someone breathing in fear. He signaled his men to hold position and crouched inside. There, curled against a broken beam, was a Japanese woman in her 20s. Her hair was matted with sweat and dust, her clothing torn, her hands shaking violently as she pressed her arms across her torso as if guarding something precious or something dangerous. Hale had seen civilians hide grenades this way. He had also seen terrified women taught to fear Americans, convinced they would be brutalized if captured. Fear made people unpredictable. He raised both hands slowly, trying to show he meant no harm. "You're safe. No one's going to hurt you," he said, though she could not understand the words. The tone was everything. Still, she tightened her grip across her stomach, her breathing sharper, faster. Something was wrong, very wrong. Her eyes darted away in shame, not aggression. Then Hale saw it, a spreading patch of dried and fresh blood around her abdomen, half hidden beneath torn cloth. She wasn't protecting a weapon, she was hiding an injury, a bad one, the kind of wound that killed quietly after the shooting stopped. "Medic," Hale called softly. Jenkins slid into the hut, saw the blood, and swore under his breath. "She's been hiding this for days," he said. "If we don't open that wound and clean it, she won't make it through the night." But the woman shook her head violently, clutching her clothing tighter. She was terrified, not of the Americans, but of what lay beneath the fabric. Shame in her culture ran deep. Wounds were weakness. Weakness was a burden, and becoming a burden was worse than death. Jenkins whispered urgently, "Sarge, I need to see it." Hale nodded. He tried again, gently touching her wrist. "We're trying to save you." She recoiled, trembling harder. At that moment, Hale made the impossible decision, the one that would haunt him and yet save her life. He grabbed the torn fabric near her shoulder and pulled, not violently, not aggressively, just firmly enough to expose the truth she was dying to hide. Her clothing tore open, and everyone froze. Underneath was a deep, infected laceration stretching across her abdomen, swollen and discolored, the skin cracked and hot with fever. It wasn't a wound from that day. This had been rotting inside her for nearly a week. Every hour she hid it, she had been dying a little more. The woman cried out, not from the tear, but from the shame of being exposed. Tears streamed down her face as she turned away, trying to cover herself again. Hale caught her hands gently. "Easy, easy. We're here to help," he whispered. Jenkins moved quickly, sprinkling sulfa powder, cleaning the infection, binding the wound with precious medical gauze. The woman sobbed, trembling not from fear of Americans, but from the overwhelming exhaustion of someone who had fought to survive alone, long past the point where survival made sense. Outside, the platoon watched silently, expecting to hear a grenade, an explosion, anything. But when Hale stepped out with the wounded woman carried on a stretcher, their tension melted into a heavy, respectful quiet. No bombs, no tricks, just a human being who had been suffering right in front of them. Hours later at the field aid station, as she drifted in and out of consciousness, she finally whispered something to the interpreter. She thought if they saw the wound, they would leave her behind to die. Instead, the Americans had saved her. The truth stunned the entire platoon, not because a wound was unusual, but because war had taught them to expect danger in every shadow. They had forgotten that behind every hut, every terrified face, there might simply be someone trying to live through the day.
and sometimes, to save a life, a soldier had to tear clothing, not out of cruelty, never out of violence, but because it was the only way to uncover the truth hidden beneath fear and silence. The reason no one expected was that she wasn't the enemy at all. She was just someone who needed help.
For 2 days, the rain came down in long, punishing sheets that turned every path into mud and every bunker into a dripping cave. The aid station worked like an island inside a storm. Stretcher bearers trudged in and out, medics shouted above the rainfall, and the wounded lay in rows beneath flapping canvas roofs that trembled with each gust of wind. Yet inside one corner of that soaked tent, the same Japanese woman who had arrived half-conscious now rested with a strange, fragile calm. Her fever had dropped. The infection had stopped spreading. She could finally speak without trembling. And that was when the real story came out. Mendez sat beside her, notebook in hand, translating her broken whispers into English. Hale stood nearby, arms crossed, face rigid but attentive. The woman explained that she hadn't been hiding only out of shame for her wound. She had been hiding because she believed she would never see her child again if the Americans found her. Her voice cracked when she spoke the child's name. A boy, 5 years old, left with an aunt in a valley 3 miles away when the shelling began. She hadn't seen him in 9 days. When Mendez translated her final sentence, she doesn't know if he is alive, but she prays he cried softly so enemies wouldn't find him. The entire tent seemed to still around them. Even the rain outside felt silent for a moment. Hale felt something settle heavily in his chest. He had seen men die, friends vanish, and battles lost. But something about a frightened mother whispering her son's name in the middle of a war-torn island struck deeper than any bullet wound. It made everything feel too real, too human. The battalion commander didn't want to spare men for a civilian search. "Not our mission," he said flatly. "Our priority is securing Hill 400 before sundown tomorrow." But Hale couldn't shake the look on the woman's face when she mentioned the boy. When he walked out of the tent that night, the rain hitting his helmet like tapping fingers, he felt the weight of a decision forming long before he admitted it aloud. Atwood approached him quietly. "You're thinking about going, aren't you?" Hale didn't answer. Sigh. "Look, Sarge, you save a woman, that's one thing, but searching for a kid in the jungle? If command finds out—" "They won't," Hale said. Atwood blinked. So it's that kind of decision." Later that night, with the storm still pounding the treetops, Hale gathered 2 volunteers, Atwood and Mendez, and slipped away from the perimeter. They didn't take a squad. They didn't take orders. They only took rifles, a compass, and the faint directions of a trembling mother who had described every bend of the path to her sister's hut. The jungle at night was almost supernatural. Even Hale, who had been fighting here for months, felt unsettled by the way shadows seemed to shift on their own. But something drove them forward. Not duty, not command, not strategy. Human responsibility. They found the first sign an hour before dawn. A small sandal, half rotten, washed into the mud by rain. Mendez knelt and brushed it off. "A kid's," he whispered. No doubt. They followed the trail deeper, moving quietly, rifles raised. Every snapped twig could be an ambush. Every rustling branch could be a sniper repositioning. Twice they froze, certain they had seen movement, but it was only wind and leaves. Then, just after the sky turned from black to gray, they reached a small hut hidden under a slope of palm leaves. Smoke drifted from a dying fire. The door hung open. The place felt abandoned. Inside, the aunt lay dead, likely from shrapnel days earlier. In the corner, wrapped in a blanket that had once been a family heirloom, was the boy. Weak, silent, alive.
Mendez rushed forward first. "Está bien, está bien," he whispered instinctively in Spanish before correcting himself softly in Japanese. The child's eyes fluttered open, barely able to focus. But he wasn't afraid, not in the way the woman in the hut had been. He was simply tired, starved, and empty from days of waiting for someone who never came. Hale lifted him gently. The boy weighed almost nothing. Atwood glanced outside anxiously. "We need to move. This place is too exposed."
They carried him back through the jungle, legs aching, nerves stretched tight. The rain returned halfway through the trip, turning the trail into a slipping hell. Twice Hale almost fell. Once Atwood caught him before he tumbled down a ravine. When they finally reached the perimeter, the guards stared in disbelief. "You brought back a kid? Where the hell were you guys? You're gonna get court-martialed for this." Maybe. Maybe not. Hale didn't care. When the woman saw her son carried into the aid station, she struggled to sit up despite the pain tearing at her stitches. She reached out with shaking hands as the boy lifted his head weakly and saw her. "Okasan." The way she broke into tears did something to the entire tent. Even the medics looked away, pretending to check supplies. Hale stepped back, letting the moment wash over him. He had seen victory, defeat, loss, and glory. But nothing in the Pacific War had ever felt as meaningful as this quiet reunion between two people who had been swallowed by a conflict they never asked for. For the first time since the war began, Hale allowed himself to feel something like hope. Small, fragile, stubbornly alive. And maybe that was the real reason, the unexpected reason, behind everything he had done. Because sometimes, in a world filled with fear and cruelty, the only resistance a man could offer was humanity. For 2 days, the rain came down in long, punishing sheets that turned every path into mud and every bunker into a dripping cave. The aid station worked like an island inside a storm. Stretcher bearers trudged in and out, medics shouted above the rainfall, and the wounded lay in rows beneath flapping canvas roofs that trembled with each gust of wind. Yet inside one corner of that soaked tent, the same Japanese woman who had arrived half-conscious now rested with a strange, fragile calm. Her fever had dropped. The infection had stopped spreading. She could finally speak without trembling. And that was when the real story came out. Mendez sat beside her, notebook in hand, translating her broken whispers into English. Hale stood nearby, arms crossed, face rigid but attentive. The woman explained that she hadn't been hiding only out of shame for her wound. She had been hiding because she believed she would never see her child again if the Americans found her. Her voice cracked when she spoke the child's name. A boy, 5 years old, left with an aunt in a valley 3 miles away when the shelling began. She hadn't seen him in 9 days. When Mendez translated her final sentence, she doesn't know if he is alive, but she prays he cried softly so enemies wouldn't find him. The entire tent seemed to still around them. Even the rain outside felt silent for a moment. Hale felt something settle heavily in his chest. He had seen men die, friends vanish, and battles lost. But something about a frightened mother whispering her son's name in the middle of a war-torn island struck deeper than any bullet wound. It made everything feel too real, too human. The battalion commander didn't want to spare men for a civilian search. "Not our mission," he said flatly. "Our priority is securing Hill 400 before sundown tomorrow." But Hale couldn't shake the look on the woman's face when she mentioned the boy. When he walked out of the tent that night, the rain hitting his helmet like tapping fingers, he felt the weight of a decision forming long before he admitted it aloud. Atwood approached him quietly. "You're thinking about going, aren't you?" Hale didn't answer. Sigh. "Look, Sarge, you save a woman, that's one thing.
But searching for a kid in the jungle? If command finds out, they won't, Hale said. Atwood blinked. Ah, so it's that kind of decision.
The battalion left the aid station at sunrise 2 days later. Orders had come down. Advance inland, secure the next ridge, keep pushing until the Japanese defenses broke. It was the same pattern the war had repeated across dozens of islands, but something about this morning felt different to Sergeant Hale. Maybe it was the quiet. For once, there were no artillery blasts overhead. Maybe it was the way the light cut cleanly through the palm leaves, washing the camp in a pale gold that made everything look softer than it really was. Or maybe, he thought, it was because part of him knew he was leaving behind something he couldn't carry forward. Before departure, Hale walked back to the medical tent. The woman, now sitting up on her own, looked stronger, the fever gone. Her son sat beside her eating warm rice from a tin cup, his face still thin but no longer ghost-like. When they saw Hale, both straightened instinctively. Mendez translated as she bowed repeatedly, tears forming again despite her efforts to stay composed. She spoke slowly, deliberately, choosing words with care even through pain. She says, Mendez translated softly, that she will never forget that you saved her life and brought her child back to her. She says you tore her clothing only because the war forced her to hide her wound. She wants you to know she understands that now, and she is grateful. Hale swallowed hard. He had heard thanks before, from rescued Marines, from civilians they liberated, but none of them felt like this. This one felt like forgiveness for a moment he had never been sure he deserved. He bowed back awkwardly, and the child mimicked the gesture. Something about that small, clumsy bow hit Hale harder than any battlefield loss. It felt like a reminder that even in places soaked with fear, humans could still reach across the boundaries war created. As the platoon prepared to leave, Atwood nudged Hale lightly. "You know," he said, "if command ever finds out we went off on our own to find that kid—" Hale cut him off with a small smirk. "It was worth it." Atwood shrugged. Damn right it was. They marched out shortly after, rifles slung, helmets low, boots thudding against the wet earth. But after a few steps, Hale paused and turned back one last time. Through the tent opening, he saw the woman holding her boy close, sunlight brushing across both their faces. She lifted one trembling hand toward him, not a wave, not a farewell, but a gesture of quiet acknowledgement, the kind people give when words fail. Hale nodded once in return. A soldier's promise, a human one. Then he turned and followed his man into the jungle. The war would continue. New battles, new wounds, more nights where the enemy was close enough to hear breathing through the trees. But he carried something with him now that no weapon could destroy and no order could erase. The memory of a moment where humanity survived the war, where fear gave way to truth, where tearing a piece of cloth revealed not danger, but a life worth saving. And in the long years after the Pacific grew quiet, Hale would remember that woman and her child more clearly than any battle map or victory parade, because in a war defined by destruction, they had been living proof that compassion, small, stubborn, and often hidden, could still find a place to breathe. That was the real reason no one expected. It wasn't about danger. It wasn't about enemies. It was about saving someone who thought she was beyond saving. It was about choosing to be human, even in a moment built for violence. Thank you for watching this story. If this moment moved you, if it reminded you that even in the darkest parts of war, humanity can still survive, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Here, we tell the real and often forgotten human stories of World War II, stories that show not just how people fought, but how they lived, feared, hoped, and survived.
Now, I want to hear from you. Question 1. If you were in Sergeant Hale's place, facing a terrified woman hiding a deadly wound, what would you have done? Question 2. Do you think more WW2 stories should focus on the human side of the war, not just the battles? Drop your answers in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you want more stories like this, subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Thanks for being part of RPG 2 Tales, where history becomes human again.